everyone, I'm Shelby and I am here with Leaderboard. Thanks Leaderboard for having me. So currently I am sitting here in my coffee lab at our newly built KW Coffee Collective. KWCC is a shared roasting space where roasters and cafe owners can run time in our space and on our equipment to roast their own coffee. So we're here essentially to help coffee folks start their roasting business. So I am one of the roasting coaches here. I have 4 years of experience in roasting at a production scale, and along with 7+ years of cafe settings, both as barista and as manager. So anyway, that's enough about me. So today we're actually going to talk about different processing methods and how to identify them. We'll discuss differences between washed, honey, and natural process. So I have 3 coffees in front of me. So this first one here is a washed coffee from Colombia. And the second one here in front of me is a honey process, red honey from Costa Rica. And then the third one is a natural coffee from Costa Rica as well. These are actually samples that I just received from Apex Coffee Imports. So I'm going to actually try them for the first time with all of you. So I'm going to use these coffees just as examples to try and help clarify what these processing methods taste like and look like. So before we dive into how to identify them, I think it's important to understand how they're processed at origin. So we'll start with the wash process. So in this process, the coffee seeds are fully removed from the cherries through a depulper. Then they're washed of its mucilage in large fermentation tanks. And then after that, they are dried on patios or raised beds. So essentially we're taking all the fruit off and we just want the bean. This method is pretty common in most producing countries like Colombia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Guatemala, etc. Then we have the natural process coffee. So with this method, the coffee cherries are not removed from the seeds. The cherries are in fact dried with the seeds still inside them, and then they are depulped afterwards. So in this method, we are basically, the seed is like absorbing all the fruit and juice and sugars from the fruit through the drying method. This is a common method found in Brazil, especially, and also in Ethiopia and sometimes Costa Rica. Then we have the honey processed coffee. And in this process, the coffee cherries are depulped, however, but with some of the mucilage still left over the coffee seed. Then they are dried on patios or raised beds. There are different types of honey process, such as the main ones, which are yellow honey, red honey, and black honey. The way they're differentiated is based on the percentage of pulp or mucilage left on the coffee seed. So a black honey typically has a higher percentage of mucilage left, whereas a yellow honey will have a lower percentage of mucilage left. All right, so that is the processing method. Let's talk about how they look and how to identify them by their appearance. So we'll start with the wash process. So this one, typically the middle cut that you see on all coffee beans, that middle cut has a very obvious pale white silver skin or parchment, you could call it. And typically the surface is more uneven in color and sometimes wrinkly. Then we have the natural process, which is pretty opposite. It's actually the middle cut is darker and doesn't really have an obvious silver skin in the center. It sometimes even has an iridescent sparkle, probably from the residual sugars left behind during the drying process. And the surface is typically more smooth and more even in color. Then we have the tricky one. So the honey process can sometimes look like either or. Yellow honey process can have some parchment still visible in the middle cut due to less residual sugars, can look sometimes more like a wash process. Whereas red or black honey process can have little to no silver skin in the middle and looks closer to a natural. Here I have a red honey, and it has a darker middle cuts. Most of them have a bit of a darker one. There is some with like a little bit of that silver skin, but it's not as obvious as the washed. Now, the surface of these beans are also like pretty uneven in color and not as smooth, like they're pretty wrinkly. So that's why it's hard to tell. It's like hard to know whether it is a washed or a natural. They could look pretty similar to either or, right? So that's when it comes to taste and trying to identify it based on taste. So Jonathan Gagne, who is an astrophysicist, is also a coffee blogger and has published some incredible articles on coffee and some books for coffee enthusiasts. He published a pretty cool article or blog about the common flavor descriptors between varieties and processing methods. The article is called How Coffee Varietals and Processing Affect Taste. I highly recommend reading it. So here at KWCC, we've printed all these charts off and have them available in our coffee lab. So I've gone through and collected some of the common flavor descriptors for the processing methods. And so it looks something like this. So it uses the flavor wheel similar to behind me. It's got a bit of a glare, so it might be hard to see, but so it kind of shows like the common flavor notes that you find in these kinds of processes. So yeah, so I've gone through all that and tried to come up with the most common ones. So for a wash process, typically the common flavor descriptors are citrus, so lemon, lime, orange. It has sometimes a cocoa or almond nut finish. So almond nut, which is more like dry kind of thing, and typically a caramel sweetness. The body tends to be more tea-like or medium body, and the acidity resembles that of citrus fruit. Then the natural process typically has notes of raspberry, blueberry, strawberry, so a lot of berry notes, hazelnut, so more of like a creamy nut flavor. I find Brazils typically taste more like peanuts. You can have chocolate, sometimes some stone fruit, more like a roasted stone fruit. Yeah, a lot of berries and florals as well. The body is typically a lot heavier and juicy, and sometimes has that sticky sugar feeling. It reminds me of drinking Fruitopia as a kid, that sugary juice. And the acidity tends to be a bit more tart or sometimes even delicate at times and very round. Whereas the honey process, this one typically has notes of dried fruit like dried fig and raisins, stone fruit like apricot, peach, sometimes tropical fruits as well. It can be syrupy like honey or maple syrup kind of idea, and some citrus as well. So the body is typically juicy and heavier than a washed, while the acidity tends to be a lot more complex. I find it typically resembles that of tropical fruit acidity or stone fruit acidity. So let's try these coffees out. So washed coffee. So I'm definitely getting that citrus, like almost like orange citrus, a little bit of grape. I also find it has that that cocoa or almond finish, and very sweet, like vanilla, like a vanilla sweetness. Very classic washed coffee. And then the red honey from Costa Rica. So I am getting that's like dried fruit, like raisins. The sweetness is like a syrup, like not necessarily honey, but more like maple syrup. And I'm also getting like a soft tropical fruit, like melon or papaya kind of flavor. The acidity is very complex and well-rounded. It's very nice. And then we have the natural Costa Rican coffee. This one right off the bat has that big body, like heavy body. The aromatics are like jasmine, like floral, like rose. And I'm getting that like raspberry kind of flavor, like a dark chocolate finish. It's very, very lovely. Anyway, so to summarize, first, I tried to identify it based off the appearance first. Wash versus natural is pretty easy to identify next to each other. However, if you're unsure of the honey process, just go by those general tasting notes for honey. So washed is typically more like clean, crisp, citrus kind of flavor, tea-like cocoa almond finish. Whereas natural coffees tend to be more berry-like, wine, heavy body, and florals are pretty obvious in that one. And then honey is typically more complex. It's got a lot more of like the stone fruit, dried fruit, melon, tropical fruit, pretty juicy. These ones are typically more fruit forward, which you can have some fruit forward washed, but typically these ones are pretty obvious in their fruitiness. Some tips. I always recommend tasting coffees next to each other in order to really compare them and understand them. That way you can compare body or something, like, or the acidity, like this one has a more intense or more complex acidity than this one, kind of idea. And look for those, maybe go to your local coffee shop and buy some of these different processing methods and coffees and try them next to each other, try them at home, test them at home, kind of idea. All right, I hope you learned something from this video. I think that's all from me. However, if you're thinking of starting a roasting business, or if you want to learn more about roasting, you can find us at kwcoffeecollective.ca. All right, good luck everyone with this season of Leaderboard. Thank you so much.